Hitting revenue targets is hard and requires constant hustle. Last quarter's success is already forgotten. Learn the mindset and tactics of today's most successful revenue producers in B2B marketing and sales. We call this the revenue hustle. I'm your host, Tom Hessen, navigating you on this journey. Today's show is sponsored by 9 Lenses, an interactive assessment platform that enables you to add instant value to your buyers and allows your sales team to tailor business conversations focused on the pain points each and every time. Check them out at 9lenses.com.
So this is Tom Hessen, the host of the Revenue Hustle podcast, and it is my distinct pleasure to bring Jaime Konzelman onto the Revenue Hustle. So Jaime, welcome to the podcast.
Hey Tom, happy holidays. Thanks so much for having me today.
Yes, thank you for taking some time out here in the busy end of year. I know there's a lot going on, ramping up the final push here, as well as planning for next year. So thank you for taking some time. So I'm really excited about our conversation today. Jaime's got a tremendous amount of sales experiences. Just a little bit, right? Just a little. And so currently you're the vice president of sales in North America and Canada for Unisys. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm the regional head of sales for the Americas. So basically I see all sales for new logo, net new business, account growth, that kind of stuff.
Fantastic. And so we're going to dive deep into Jaime's career as we go through the podcast. She's worked at a lot of professional service firms in sales leadership roles, which is certainly a sweet spot of mine, having come from a professional service background myself before getting into software. But Jaime, you know how we do this. We do the revenue rules. What's your first revenue rule?
And I love this, by the way. So this is going to be a fun conversation. So revenue rule number 1 in my book is that sellers who embody sales as service completely transform the buyer-seller relationship.
Tell me more about that. I love that.
Sure. So to dig a little deeper, you may be, you or your listeners may be familiar with the concept of servant leadership or being a leader of other people and doing it from a place of service. When I think back to my entire sales career and the little nuggets or skills or attributes or ways of being that have made me most successful, not just in selling, but building relationships that really have the ability to last a lifetime, it's when I was coming from a place of service. And so as I've moved up the ranks, if you will, leading, larger and larger teams, it's been this really cool space where I've been able to develop a framework called sales as service. And so what that means is I work with my teams and coach and lead, right? Whether you're new in sales and you're part of the inside sales team, or if you're senior, when we come together, we start to look at and break down and define a framework. What does it mean when you look at sales through the lens of truly a servant leadership mindset?
Wow. Well, I love the servant leadership framework, just as a whole, just that idea. But not all salespeople, I suspect, think about sales in that way, right? So how did you see sales in that way instead of you think about transactional selling or, I just got to get my logo and move on, right? Like there's just all this sort of, bad impressions of sales. But how did you come to that sales as a service mindset?
It's really been a journey. I mean, and it started when I first stepped into sales leadership or even before then, right? So I was an individual contributor running very, very large, complex transactions. Say that 3 times fast, right? Think the world of $100 million, $500 million outsourcing deals, right? Not for the faint of heart. Often a very long 9 to 18 month sales cycle, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, and in reality was getting a little burnt out of some of the minutia of that. In my personal life, I'm a kind of a self-help professional development junkie, right, if you will. And I had taken a year-long professional development class where most of the people were going through that to become certified executive coaches, right? ICF, the whole 9 yards. And it was through that program that I discovered who I was as a coach. So if you think about it this way, 20 odd years as a single contributor, chasing the money, having a great time, and my personal drive changing, and then discovering my passion for coaching and learning this modality of a language really around helping people. I had always had a passion for helping and seeing when I helped my customers, I sold more, but hadn't developed this language around sales as service until I started first coaching other individual contributors, other sales leaders. And then over the course of years, went from leading large complex deals to myself to growing a larger and larger team, to the point where I now see myself as a coach first and have been able to help people not just elevate their sales. Like, that's great. Everybody wants to sell more, bigger deals faster, right? And companies want to reduce attrition, keep their salespeople happy, and have customers for life. And when I looked at the intersections of where I had been the most successful in those specific KPIs, it was always when I was firmly grounded in this place of truly serving a customer, to borrow your word, right, beyond any one transaction, so that you're sort of building these very deep personal relationships. And there's other aspects to it, right? And so when I started to unbundle what those things were, I started to teach them and take people through trainings. And the coolest part for my own journey was that barrier or separation between Jaime Konzelman, now passionately coaching and teaching people, and a 20-odd year sales career disappeared. And I'm now living and breathing a place where I get to coach and train others in really methods that have worked for me well, and this framework of sales as service, and then watch others step further into their own personal power and sell more deals faster at higher, total contract value, and have a lot more fun doing it.
Right. Well, there's so much to unpack there. That's so rich.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that, I think one thing that I've learned is you can't convince the customer to do anything they don't want to do. Right. And that's this notion of sales is like you're tricking people, or you're convincing them, or you're, there's some sort of like sleight of hand where you're getting them to like, do things against their will. I've learned a long time that never happens, right? Like you can't dictate timing. You can't dictate, a lot of different things. And so the more that you align yourself to just help them buy or help them solve problems, instead of you trying to push stuff, right? It just changes the, like you said, the nature of the relationship, the way you see yourself, the actions I'm sure you're going to talk about of how you change the way you speak, act, and so I just love that. Tell me a little bit about the framework that you kind of organize the sales as service around it.
Sure. And so it never comes from just me, because that's part of what leadership is, right? I see myself as a facilitator of conversations, whether it's with customers and stakeholders, either externally outside the company or internally, or with my team. All right. So it's typically a process. Like when I came to Unisys, like week one, I was like, great, when can I get everybody in the same room? And people kind of looked at me a little funny. They're like, well, they're sellers. You want to take them off the field and get them in the same room? And I said, we're not going to be successful individually until we are successful as a team. And that requires some time together. And so we got the team together and we walked through a series of exercises that I've facilitated both in large groups and small, where I ask a lot of questions. We do things like, what are all the attributes of the best leader, the best boss, the best professor who's had the biggest impact on your life? And then vice versa, what's the worst? And what that opens up is this rich dialogue about what are these ideal characteristics that have had the biggest impact on ourselves professionally and personally. And then having lots of dialogue around that, and then turning it over to what would happen if we took those attributes and applied them to how we do our jobs. What do we think would shift with our customers, our prospects, and even within our own internal organization? So as an example, you've shared how, coming from the software side and the services side, you've probably heard the expression that it is harder to sell internally than it is externally, right? Anyone in this type of services sales knows that. And if you don't sell services and you sell a product, really what that means is, you can go find a customer or a prospect who says, yeah, I'd love a proposal on that. Unisys, you're great at workplace services. Come give me a proposal. Well, in the services business, there's oftentimes a lack of resources, maybe internally, right? The expression is nobody keeps a bench. And so you've got to come in and run the gauntlet of why is that customer worthy of our resources and our time? And it's not because people are picky or they haven't done appropriate resource planning, but in the services world, it's often at least 1% of the total contract value in terms of an investment in time and resources to bid on something, right? So if it's $100 million deal, right, 1% of that is what's going to cost us. We have to be picky about what we go after because there are so many, window shoppers, right? Oh yeah, give me a proposal, but they're never going to buy. And so sellers in this business have to get really, really good about qualifying, understanding the value proposition that a customer has, what's really going to make them buy. And at those dollar price points, it's not just a director and a VP, it's likely a board of directors. There could be an outside consultant. You might be talking about a stakeholder map of 25 people. Right. And so if you have not done your due diligence and understanding all of those things, you won't get the resources. And there's nothing worse than going back to a customer who's like, yeah, I'd love a proposal from you. And you're like, I'm sorry, the powers that be said we can't do that, right? It's not the right time. We don't have the right resources. You're not the right fit, right? Because that burns bridges in the marketplace for years.
Yeah. Right.
So long example, but that's kind of where part of this goes, right? So if you tie that back to what your question was, well, how do you take this ideal of sales as service and break it into functional pieces that are teachable, that are repeatable? It's not just like leadership styles are not a one size fits all.
Right.
Neither is sales as service. It's about empowering sellers with a whole bunch of tools, giving them a safe space to practice things like authenticity, some skills in there. How do you have hard conversations? Just because a customer asks you for a proposal of X doesn't mean X is what they really need. So how do you empower a seller to say, Mr. Customer or Mrs. Customer, I know that's what you want, but hey, we've done our due diligence. We've read your strategic plan. We're following your stock. We're experts in technology, and we think what you really want is over here in your blind spot. So I'm not going to get you the proposal for X until we can sit down with a few more stakeholders, or I'd be doing you a disservice. Those are very difficult, very seasoned senior conversations to have. But if you break them down and teach people how to have those kinds of hard conversations, to excavate the things that are unsaid, like Brené Brown says in leadership, but then do it within the sales arena, what happens is you go from this, I want to say, very busy hamster wheel type of sale to a very rich, deep conversation. And you get to suss out in a shorter time period if there's a right fit, but do it in a way where people feel enough psychological safety that they can actually share with you what the real problems are they're trying to solve. And that's not going to happen with a, wham, bam, thank you, man, here's my proposal, back and forth. Let's trade emails and hope we hit the mark, right? No, you actually have to do things. You have to slow down, right? You have to take a step back.
Well, I think you started talking about like the internal and training of the sales rep, but then you brought in the customer and the implications of, getting them to open up, because you've now you built trust, right?
That's
you showed that you're authentic and you really do have their best interest at heart. Whether they agree with you or not is a whole nother conversation. But the fact that you're putting your neck out there and saying, I really do think you need this, this, and this, but you really, it's hard to describe in words if you don't have those sorts of conversations, like the rich, deep conversations you're speaking about, when the customer and you are aligned to go solve this problem together, right? You're able to, they see that you're working for them, right? Looking out for their best interest rather than, hunting the commission check, or, however you want to describe that. And it's just amazing. I'm when you can get to those places, you're probably texting them, right? They're texting you.
Oh, absolutely.
You're on a call with a group of people. They're texting you on the side. Like that sort of relationship just translates the entire interaction, because they know that you're working for their best interest, but it takes skill. It takes time to foster that.
100%, right? And you asked me earlier what helped me kind of develop this model, and it's been so many different things over time. One of the biggest things I share with salespeople over and over again, if they haven't seen Simon Sinek's first TED Talk, Start With Why, which later turned into a book and is now pretty much a movement. People quote it all the time.
Right.
He walks through a very simple model. Now, he didn't create the model. It's the Golden Circle principle. And he talks about the three ways we think, right? Why, what, and how it's a cross section of how organizations operate, right? If you think about any organization in the world, most people know on the outside what they do, their job. As you move up theoretically into management or middle management or senior leadership, the higher you go in that organization, the more people know how that works, all the different pieces.
Right.
And the best companies, right? The best leaders, maybe the CEO, your visionaries, right? They look at things why, that deep intrinsic driver that drives companies. And I'm not just talking about a mission statement, right? What is the reason that companies exist? And I tell salespeople to watch it because part of that principle, Simon Sinek says, what separates the best companies, the ones that innovate over and over and over, the leaders who everybody wants to follow from everybody else. And there's one thing. Most of us communicate. If you think of that circle that I just talked about, which kind of looks like a dartboard, right? Two concentric circles, the what, the how, the why in the middle. Most of us, most businesses, most people, sellers communicate from the outside in. We sell a great product. It's got all these functions and features. It can really help you do this. They get to the how. And by that point, we've heard so many things.
Right.
No one gets to the why. And what happens is everybody's commoditized because it all sounds the same. But buying behaviors don't start from the outside in. The best leaders don't start from the outside in. They start from the why, the deepest intrinsic, right, belief. And this is not just a model that sounds cool. It's actually grounded in the tenets of neuroscience. Because that same two concentric circles that looks like a dartboard is actually a cross section of our brain. And the very center part of the brain that controls buying behavior, that controls feelings, cannot process facts and figures and numbers. It's why when you like somebody or when you want to buy something, you're like, it just feels right. Mm-hmm. Right? That's science. That's the inside of your brain. We call it the gut, right? Or the intuition.
Right,
and we can talk about how they're connected. But to bring it back to the best companies, Sinek often uses the example of Apple. They are very crystal clear and they start from their why. Right. We believe in making innovative products that make people's lives better. Here's an iPhone. It does this and this. You want to buy one? And when you actually go through the companies that do that, something really interesting happens. You feel it. You're like, yeah, I want that. Now, if they said, hey, here's a plastic box with lots of buttons and you can put apps on it and we change it in different colors and we're going to have to put a new operating system on it every month. It's $1,400. You want one? No.
Right.
And so when I take that model and I started teaching it, just watch TED Talk. It's 13 minutes. If it resonates, get the book, right? And if you book resonates, then take every one of your pitches and your client decks and the way you speak to customers and flip it. Stop showing the slides with a million different things on it that nobody's going to remember. Most companies today, many public companies grow through acquisition. When I was at my previous company, there'd been 30 acquisitions in 5 years. Sellers would go into customers and be like, look, we're smart. Right. We have an M&A department. And today you're going to talk to me and I'm from this one. Tomorrow you're going to talk to this. And then like eventually the customers would go, who are you? I just wanted to talk to Atta. Right. But if you forget all of that, the hows and the whats, and you come in and you say, we believe technology powers progress. I've looked at your 10K. I've looked at where you're missing in the elements. And I think I can help you get there by these 3 things. Can we have a meeting? It completely transforms the way you're having a conversation. You know, the Zig Ziglar back in the day said people buy from their friends, right? People buy from people they like.
Right.
Well, Zig was clearly ahead of his time because here we are how many decades later and Simon Sinek telling us people don't buy what you do, they buy what you believe. And what you believe is grounded in why you do it. And when you wrap around why you do something from an authentic place of trying to serve, meaning I'm not here trying to make my quota, but I've invested time in getting to know you, to getting to know your company, and I am here to help you with potential solutions. Now you're speaking the language of service, and you may not get that sale in that moment, but I guarantee you will establish a relationship that is built on trust, and that trust can last a lifetime.
Yeah. No, that is great. How has your team taken to this? So if they've never seen the world like this, right? So you said you were leading some workshops when you first joined Unisys. You know, I suspect there's a range, right, of people from this is stupid to like drinking from the Kool-Aid, right? Talk about
thank you for asking this. That's what I thought going into it, right? And so if we go back 18 months when I first started doing this, first did it with some inside sales folks, and they're fresh out of college, bright-eyed, hungry, eager to learn. You know, they graduated sales degrees. I didn't even know that existed. So they were safe. but I was nervous because I had not shown myself and my beliefs in the corporate setting in that way, and they loved it. I was like, this is great. And word spread. Then when I got promoted, we started doing with the insights or the senior business developers at Atos. I was nervous again because I thought what you said. Some people will go in, some people are going to think I'm crazy, and it actually went very well. However, meaning people went all in a way I never imagined. Wow. Every single person. But I still discredited that warm reception or that willingness to learn. And maybe because of my own fear, I thought, well, of course they're going to go all in. I'm a former deal maker. I was one of the top sellers for the last 10 years. They'll tell you, you know, they know
they'll
me,
do anything.
they like me, right? They're my friends. And so coming into Unisys was the first time I was right now I'm the sales leader, and this is very senior sellers, right? I mean, most of these folks have, you know, so I've got someone on my team with her PhD in AI who sold $30 billion of deals in IBM, right? I've got somebody else, I mean, just who's come from PE. I mean, brilliant sellers. And I was thinking, well, I believe this works. I think it's going to build a culture. I think it'll help them make better. But I was petrified.
Right.
I call a friend the night before, petrified. Are they going to even like the slides? And every single one of them went all in. I would say, right, like what happened, we say what happens in the room stays in the room. But I can say people had deeply personal breakthroughs and shares, and people cried that I wouldn't have thought would cry because they were having that much of a reaction and experience, that by the end of it, I've had people share that it was life-changing.
Wow.
And I was just hoping to bring the people together and get to know everybody and form this cool, share something that's worked for me and encourage them to try it on, like a jacket, right? Try it on. This has worked really well for me. If it doesn't work for you, it won't hurt my feelings, but please try it on so that we're all operating from a foundation of the same definitions, the same beliefs, the same values, and that will make us a team. And that was part of the context that I gave, giving people freedom that if it wasn't for them, at least they went all in for a few days. And I'm still reeling in how much people that maybe I would have thought it was like kind of woo, right? I mean, put very senior people in a room and say we're going to do different kinds of exercises around trust and break wooden boards and right?
Sit in circles, sing kumbaya,
right. But everybody embraced it, and it may be timing, right? We are coming out of calendar year 3 of COVID. I really believe people are craving, not just in the buyer-seller relationship, but sellers and people in corporate America are craving authenticity more than ever before. Right. And I do think that there is I don't believe in stereotypes, but when we have the caliber of sellers that we have here at Unisys, they're open to learning. They want more things. People want to be better. Anything that makes them more effective at what they do helps them find deeper satisfaction in their job. Because let's face it, we all know sales can be a grind, right? I tell a lot of people the new logo hunting in service is not for the faint of heart. If you're not used to the baseball dynamic where you strike out more than you ever get contact, this might not be sport for you. But if you can figure out what your dreams are, right, and the sales career helps you get there, and we can learn some new things together as a group, and we're all better for it, then people really do go all in. And it's been probably one of the biggest gifts in my career to get to watch.
Wow. Well, we could spend the entire podcast just on this topic. Which, because I think there's just this, this is just from like the inside seller perspective, right? We haven't even talked about like the implications to the customer and how they receive, right? We talked a little bit about like when you've kind of got there, right? When you're in that kind of position with the customer and they are opening up to you and because I'm sure at deal sizes of the ones you're talking about, it's a whole different ball game in terms of, people's, their career could be at stake if they make the wrong decision, right? Like it's
100%.
It's a big,
it's
a big, big deal, right? No pun intended there, but it's also significant to their, do they get promoted? Do they get fired as a result of making these sorts of decisions? So I can only imagine just how guarded they may be, right? What they're willing to share, not share for their own protection or
100%. And I've never heard somebody frame it in that way, but you're right. The stakes are in the large deal world. The stakes are just as high, if not higher, for all the stakeholders, because if it goes well, right, people can get promoted. If it doesn't go well, you might need a new job.
Right.
And people don't talk about that.
Yeah.
And so it also underscores why that authenticity and building trust at the foundation of that relationship makes or breaks it, in my opinion. Right? I'm sure there's somebody else out there who feels really wizardy and smart and can pull one over on people, but I got to think that is a very short-lived career path.
Right. No, I agree. Well, great. Well, that's a fantastic revenue rule. Let's. I know you've got a second one. I want to talk about that as well. So, give us your second revenue rule.
And I feel Ninnies do fingers, but revenue rule number 2 is hustle and heart will set you apart. And I coined that because hustle can be a controversial word, right? And I'm sure we'll get into my background in a little bit, but I think these days when we're so inundated with messages from the media, right? And everything tends to be a 3 rules, 5 quick steps to lose weight, right?
Right.
Slow down. I think hustling gets a bad rap. People are afraid of that burnout, right? Of taking on too much. And so I want to define what hustle means to me and why it's important in sales. And then of course the heart part, because I believe they go together. When I think of hustling, I think of it in the athlete mentality, right? I was not an athlete growing up. I wanted to be desperately. I was one of those chunky kids who used to like press my nose to the chain link fence and get the little eyes around my eyes. Like, right, mommy, why can't I play soccer? Right. And she's like, it's $5,000 for club and you'll play when you're older and it's free in school. Well, we all know how that works, right? If you live in a town where the kids play soccer since they're 5, when you go out and you're 12 and you don't know how to dribble soccer ball, it's not going to work out so well. But I share that little story because in my 30s, I became an endurance athlete. And today I have done about a dozen Ironman races, right?
Oh my gosh.
World triathlons. And it was endurance racing that helps me crystallize this concept of hustling. And I love sport because it's a great metaphor for life and for selling especially. And when I think of hustling, what I think of is moving with a sense of urgency, always kind of moving the ball forward with whatever your end is in mind. So in large deal sales, that end in mind sometimes is getting to that next sales stage.
Right.
And hustling is important because if we don't move with a sense of urgency, buyers are very finicky. I remember not 10 years ago, if a customer wanted a large proposal, it was normal. You got a month, you got 2 months. And over time, that time period has shrunken. It is not uncommon now for somebody to say, hey, we just need a rough estimate and a proposal, and we need it next week. And you might be talking about something that requires 15 to 20 resources, 4 levels of approval in your organization, right? If you can't figure out how to move the ball metaphorically down the field or how to orchestrate a large, complex team of stakeholders like that with enough urgency that you become prioritized, they understand exactly what you're trying to accomplish with the customer or the prospect, you won't get anywhere. And I think companies are seeing that now. Very large companies are struggling to keep pace with this market demand of, I call it the Amazon effect, right? Here's my phone, I buy. And we do it as consumers, and enterprises have started consuming cloud services that way. Oh, let me go get, it used to be, I had to call my rep, somebody would order me a server, they'd stand it up in the data center, we'd unbox it, rack it, stack it, right? There was a process. At Amazon and Google, if they've made that push of a button. Right. So that's shifting the expectation and creating less patience for people who want turnaround. So if you cannot move quickly, you will not be successful. But there's this concept of, hustling in that I ground it in heart because you'll have to have good intentions, because if you don't, right, you might end up with a big mess on your hands, right? It's not about speed for speed's sake. Speed, accuracy, and intention have got to be aligned. And that's a tough thing to pull off. I mean, I don't care if you're just selling one piece of software, right? Or a certain single product, single service, or something complex. The agility that is needed to keep pace with today's business, I think, is underestimated by a lot of this, I'm not going to say media noise, but a lot of this different perceptions or different interpretations of what this word hustle means.
Yeah. Because I think, again, we're the revenue hustle here. And I think the idea that hustle equals urgency, I think I don't know that I've heard it described that way. So I do love that. And because, most times hustle feels like I got to make 1,000 cold calls today. I have to stay up from from sun up till midnight, grinding my way through everything that I need to grind through. And I'll do it every day, 7 days a week, and I may die as a result. Right. Like that's I think what the connotation is. And you're not saying that. I think the urgency is, the customer has urgency. We have to match or exceed their expectations as it results to urgency.
That's right.
And in your world where it requires a lot of different opinions to put the proposal together and approvals, you've got to get the machine to move. At
Yeah.
least in software, and a lot of times, again, the deals aren't that complex. So you can, operate a little bit more autonomously, whereas you've got to get, a lot of different people and resources and everything else kind of plugged into that. So I really like that idea of hustle is urgency. And I say that to my team as a small company is like, people choose to work with small companies for a couple of reasons. One, we can be more innovative,
Yep.
and we move a whole lot faster. So we can't for a second take our foot off the urgency. If they email us, call us, like they expect a response sooner than, sending it into the corporate portal of, support at some big co.
Absolutely. And if I can underpin it even further, to me, it's not just speed, but it's agility, because they're two slightly different things. In the athlete world, if you were playing, field hockey or soccer, the agility is when the coach is like, all right, you got to stand on your, or even volleyball. My wife is a teenage coaches teenagers in volleyball, right? They got to stand on their front feet and they got to be ready to react, right, whichever way it's coming. And so what that means applied in the services world is, right, perhaps customer wants X. And the way all of your stakeholders interpret X is they're price shopping. That's not really, they don't really want X. They're just wanting a proposal, right? There's all of these different interpretations of that one thing.
Yeah.
And your job as salesperson is to know, right? Well, is that really X? And if it is really X, how do I get all of these other stakeholders on board? And that takes that hustle and agility, because you have to be able to reposition, right, what that means and get their buy-in, even just to move forward. And so it's acting quickly, but also being, my phrase that I use all the time is steady vision, flexible means, right? If that's the deal you want to go after and you have that relationship with the customer, you've got to have flexibility in how you approach it with all of your different stakeholders, right? Or it could be cut down. And so that could mean adapting your message. That could mean, planting the seed with these different people before you go back to find out that X is, right? There's nothing better sometimes than, the finance guy says, well, we're not doing it unless they say X. You're like, great, I'm having that meeting today. Come and join me and hear it from them directly, right? So you're constantly selling on both sides, but having speed and agility as your underpinning, right? While you are steady in your vision, but flexible how you get there.
No, that's great. And, I think that it goes with the heart, because I think it kind of goes back to what you're talking about, the service, right? Like service is, heart led at the end of the day, right? You're putting other people ahead of yourself, right? Their intentions and goals ahead of my own, right? And is that the right interpretation? Kind of that heart and service all kind of coming together?
100%. It's intention, it's integrity, and it's caring. One of my favorite Maya Angelou quotes said, people will never forget what you said. People will forget what you said, People will forget what you said. They will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel.
Yeah.
That feeling, that intrinsic goodness, that's heart. And if I apply that to sales as service, right, and leadership, there's just like there's an infinite way you can sell, there are an infinite number of definitions and models of leadership. One specific model that I love by Charles Feltman defines a model for trust, and it's based on 4 factors. And of the 4 factors, which I won't going to go through the whole thing right now, he says if any 3 of those are missing, but caring is there, trust can remain. People want to know that you care, whether it's your prospect, whether it's a team, whether it's a colleague. And so that's why, to me, like if you're moving quickly and you're acting with good intentions, like there's that integrity piece, and you're doing it from a pure heart that you care, those are the people, the sellers that are able to move mountains.
Yeah, no, that is great. Um, wow. So again, hit it out of the park. Thank you for sharing that. And we got
Yeah.
some quotes to take down too. So that was awesome. So tell us a little bit, Jamie, how you got into sales.
It's a very open-ended question, and I'm happy to. My career path to selling services was completely non-traditional. I started my career selling on the stages behind the closed doors of America's greatest strip clubs. That's the tagline.
Wow.
I actually published a book this summer that shares that part of my story that had been a secret for a long time. But I'm sharing it because it's important, right? Many people would hear my story of, graduate high school at 16, scholarship kid early, hard charging on my way to vet school, and I lost my academic scholarship. And, dancing allowed me to stay in college, but I don't do anything small. So I didn't just stay at the local club as a house dancer going through school. I ended up finding a mentor. She was North America's most published centerfold at the time. And she took me on tour with her to tour the circuit. So I learned how to build a
Wow.
business as an adult feature entertainer at 19. And I say that's the start of my sales career because our biggest revenue streams were not table dances, lap dances, club fees. It was all the merchandise we sold.
Huh.
It was golf towels, it was baseball caps, it was, autographed pictures, and then we would package them up, right? And have different taglines for them. And so I really credit that world with not just, teaching me a lot, but there were definite gaps I had in socialization and communication and self-worth that I found in a very non-traditional environment, largely through the conversations I had with customers who happened to be a lot of different levels of businessmen.
Wow, that is non-traditional. So
Yeah,
how did you, I guess, go from there to B2B world?
sure. I was still dancing in New York City, and this time as a house dancer, no longer a feature. And I knew it was sort of a dead end track. I always knew this was not my forever, even though for a little
Yep.
while I thought it was my calling in life. It was pretty clear on that. And one of the books I had just finished reading was Making Friends and Influencing People.
That's one of my favorite books. Yep.
Awesome book. And so as I'm, descending the stairs to flash dancers and going down this business, I had one of those, life altering epiphanies as you do in moments. And I said, all right, well, if I'm not going to dance for cash anymore, because I realized if I hadn't set limits on how long I was there in the cash, I'd stay forever. But I couldn't just ditch it because in the dancer world, you have to pay every night and there's all these fees if you just don't show up. So I'm like, all right, I got to finish my shift for the next couple of weeks. What else does this club offer me? And I was like, oh my God, this is like a club full of self-made businessmen in New York City. What an incredible petri dish. I'm going to see if I have my book in my dance bag. I'm going to find mentors. I don't care how much money I make for the next couple of weeks. I'm going to find mentors. And that night I just started asking people in an even deeper way. Like I knew what my customers or regulars did. I knew somebody owned a chain of mortgages and somebody else was an attorney, right? You knew all of that. But I came in with this question and I said, okay, if I took you up, because people had offered me jobs many times and never took them. I said, if you were serious about, XYZ job, like, would you be willing to mentor me? Like, I want to be self-made. How did you first make your money? And I started hearing all these different stories. And I eavesdropped on a table of three guys that were celebrating something. They talked about a previous visit, so I kind of inserted myself as if I knew them, even though I didn't. And they were celebrating getting their first, their Series C funding for their startup, and it was a tech startup.
Yep.
And we exchanged information and learned pretty quickly they were part of the founding executive team of HotJobs.com, right? That's scaled to a two-way database,
Yep.
right? The whole recruiting cycle and
Yep.
private label
Yep.
that software into HR recruiting. And their next venture was to build the same type of database portal for casinos. They were going to help casino customers view the 360 information on their players independently. I knew nothing about casinos. I knew nothing about database marketing, but it sounded very exciting. And so I said, I want to intern for you. And they said, great, show up tomorrow at 9 a.m. And so I worked my shift that night, went home and quickly Googled interview appropriate tire. Didn't get it quite right. Because living in New York City, there's all these places in the garment district that sell clothes, like sample clothes.
Yeah.
I was like, I know, I'll go there and get a sample suit. Only years later did I realize that sample suit was probably more appropriate for mother of a bride in a Spanish wedding than an interview. Blue rhinestones and all went
Oh,
in.
wow.
And that was it, right? So I became employee number 3 at a database marketing startup in New York City, and then got the opportunity for the next 6 years as they grew and scaled to take on bigger and bigger roles, working under a group of CIOs who had formerly come from the tech world, right? So that was my first, if you will, business job. And then in true kind of fashion, like I never really looked back. But where my career got really interesting is from 2007 to 2011, because mind you, I hadn't finished college at that time. I was working on my associates. 6 years at Valley Noir, the startup, I went back and finished my degree, my undergrad degree. And when I came out, it was the worst recession since the Great Depression, right, pre-COVID. And Vegas got hit really hard. So for the next 3.5 years, I got laid off 4 times.
Wow.
But what was really cool, you would think it would be hard, but because I've stepped backwards and forwards so many times in my life, and I'm a salesperson at heart, came through a startup that had been funded by, the Hot Jobs guys. Like I knew recruiting inside and out. I knew database inside and out. I knew how to sell. So each time I got a new job, I was able to double my income, double my responsibility. And in those 3 years, experienced a 5-fold increase in income and from selling, right, outdoor advertising and things with a very low price point to these massive IT services deals.
Wow. No, what a story. And now, you describe what you're doing at Unisys, and so what a transformation. And so thank you for sharing that. Where can we follow you online?
Jaime Konzelman on LinkedIn. I also have a website we're ramping up, jaimekonzelman.com. So yeah, follow me, get in touch. Would love to hear from you. And my new book is now selling on Amazon.
And what's the name of the book?
It's titled Deal Maker. And the tagline is finding myself behind the closed doors of America's greatest strip clubs.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Jaime, for coming on to the Revenue Hustle and sharing your story and your 2 revenue rules. I've certainly enjoyed this conversation. I've taken a 1.5 pages full of notes. So I'm excited to share this with the rest of the community. So thanks again, and let's do it again soon.
I love it. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Happy holidays.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for tuning in to The Revenue Hustle. This episode has been brought to you by 9 Lenses. Close more deals with interactive assessments. Check them out at 9lenses.com. See you next time.